Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm proud to be joined by my colleague in the United States Congress, Nick Langworthy, who has been very, very instrumental in continuing this fight to ensure that the safety provisions under the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization stay in there. It's often said that we suffer our way to wisdom, that to live is to suffer, to endure the suffering, to transcend the suffering, is to give the suffering meaning. When people suffer a great tragedy in their lives, they do one of two things. They're either broken, they retreat into themselves, they become isolated and bitter, or they're broken open. They begin to see their family differently. They begin to see their country differently. They begin to see their obligations to their fellow citizens differently. This group of individuals behind us, the families of the victims of Flight 3407 that happened in February of 2029, have been an extraordinary source of courage, of perseverance, and effectiveness. We have new safety regulations that are unprecedented for one reason, because of all of them, individually and collectively. One statistic to please keep in mind: 99.8% reduction in commercial aviation fatalities. A 99.8% reduction in commercial aviation fatalities because of these extraordinary individuals behind us. I remember the night in February of 2009, I had called the Transportation Secretary, Ray LaHood. And Ray LaHood said, the National Transportation Safety Board will be on the ground tonight, and they'll be on site first thing in the morning. And they are extraordinary. They will find what happened here. This was an avoidable accident. It was an avoidable accident. I remember when the families first came to Washington, I will never forget it. You know, they were traumatized, they were sad, they lost beautiful, beautiful family members and friends, and they didn't blame the pilots. They didn't blame the pilots. They blamed the system that allowed pilots who were inadequately trained to fly that plane. So the National Transportation Safety Board found probable and real cause, and that was the basis. That was the basis from which Congress made these changes, including increasing the number of pilot training hours to 1,500. None of us knew. None of us knew that there were two levels of safety, that the regional carriers were subjected to less than larger commercial carriers, and that had to change. And that's what's changed. Why are Nick and I here? Nick and I just communicated with the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, just making him aware of the fact that there is a reauthorization, another 5-year reauthorization for the Federal Aviation Administration. There is an effort to undermine the very provisions that these families and all of us fought for over the past 14 years. We have to make sure that that doesn't happen. I will be before the House Transportation Committee on Tuesday to ensure that there are no efforts by regional carriers to water down these provisions that are all about safety for the flying public. With that, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Nick Langworthy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So great to be with you all here this morning, and I want to thank Congressman Higgins for the joint effort and his tireless commitment to safety in all transportation and protecting our passengers. And I also want to thank the families of Flight 3407, Karen and John and Susan, who you'll hear from, and all the others, and those that couldn't be with us here today, but have been unwavering in their dedication to ensuring that no other family has to endure the same tragedy and heartbreaking loss that they did. It's hard to believe it's been 14 years since that tragedy. I was there that night, and I was a district director to Congressman Lee. I'll never forget the sights and the sounds and the aftermath, and in the days that following at Town Hall and the Clarence Center Fire Hall with the families, and the anguish that they dealt with. And that pain hasn't gone away. But it's your voices that have carried us this far because the American people stand with you in your pain. And I know that even though Congressman Higgins and I are going to fight like hell to protect these safety requirements, it's your voices that are going to help carry this across the finish line. And I'm sure that you didn't think nearly 15 years later you'd still be having to fight this fight and make these arguments in the halls of Congress. And I agree with you that it's wrong. But we're here today because this important in no business decision should ever come before public safety. Period. End of story. Every industry has labor problems. Every industry's got a pinch on their financial bottom line. Public safety and the safety of the transport of all of those that use aviation should not be what is being discussed as a way to cut corners. When you book that plane for work or to take your family on a vacation, you want to have 100% confidence that the airline and the pilot has full professionalism. And the simple fact of the matter is that since we instituted the 1,500 hour training rules, there's been a single American commercial airline crash. Those results, that's proof positive that it works. And we want to keep it that way. We want to keep everyone feeling safe on America's airlines. And these challenges that the airline industry are facing are real. And you know what? They've gotten a lot of assistance from the federal government in the last several years in relief to help get over these challenges that every industry is facing. But loosening these life-saving qualifications, that's not the place to cut corners. The healthcare industry, they're facing the same challenges, but you wouldn't trust someone to operate on you that doesn't have the requisite skills or training. Lives are at stake and must always be the driving force behind policy decisions. In the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee holding these hearings this week about this important reauthorization, they're going to hear from Western New York, from Congressman Higgins and myself, and many others as these families get to work. And there's a big push from these regional carriers to allow flight simulation training to count towards these hours. But it's just not the same as real in-the-air flights, where you know your safety and the safety of others on board is dependent on the decisions that you make. There's no way to simulate how your mind and your body will respond to in-the-air challenges. We all remember the shocking and heroic story of pilot Sully Sullenberger. He landed the U.S. Airways flight on the Hudson River after bird strikes were going to take that plane down for both engines failing. You know, and all 155 of those passengers survived that day. They called it the miracle on Hudson, but we know it wasn't. It was much more than a miracle. It was because Sully was expertly experienced. He was a pilot who knew how to make the difficult decisions in case of emergency. And his training took over to bring everyone to that ground safely. Computer training cannot accurately prepare you for life or death decisions in the air. So we need to do everything in our power to protect these training requirements. And I will fight against any efforts to modify or reduce what's currently in place. And as Congressman Higgins discussed, this attempt by SkyWest to circumvent the requirements must be stopped in its tracks. Operating under a certification for public charter carrier, SkyWest subsidiary SkyWest Charter, they'd be able to operate commercial flights to essential air service airports without a crew that would have the 1,500-hour flight time. Now, first officers for charter carriers can have as little as 500 hours of experience. They saw that another carrier, Contour Airlines, was using this same workaround, and now they're trying to do the same thing. SkyWest serves millions of Americans every day, and they cannot make reckless decisions like this and put passenger safety at risk. They're putting their bottom line above what's right, what's fair, and what's just to the flying public. This is a bipartisan issue, and I'm proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with Congressman Higgins and hopefully our entire New York State delegation and the Flight 3407 families who are committed to airline safety. We can never get back the souls lost that February night in Clarence, but we can work to try to avoid another crash of an American airline. We owe it to the victims to do everything in our power, and to the airlines, large and small. They owe it to their customers who are entrusting them with their lives So thank you very much, and now I'm going to welcome to the podium Karen Eckert, one of the fine family members of 3407.
Transport on your flight. Do not accept it. And notify airline personnel immediately.
And her sister Susan.
Do not transport unattended. All carry-on and checked luggage is subject to search.
I just wanted the announcements to pass. I think a lot of you, my name is Karen Eckert. I lost my sister Beverly Eckert in the crash, and this is my sister Susan Burke. I want to thank Congressman Higgins and Congressman Langworthy so much for being here today, for all their support, because it underlines the urgency and the importance of, again, what we're facing today. We are deeply appreciative. The Airline Safety and FAA Extension Act of 2010 was unanimous. The vote was unanimous. It was a bipartisan issue. I mean, how often do you see a unanimous decision or vote within our Congress? It was the result of hard work by aviation experts and aviation professionals who investigated, analyzed, and reported on the causes of Flight 3407, as well as the crashes that had happened immediately preceding that, all on regional airlines. What they found was a pattern of shortcuts in pilot training, pilot experience among regional airlines, and those were the contributing factors to the crash. Bottom line, Congress raised the alarms. They held hearings. We went to dozens of hearings. There's been dozens and dozens more through the years. But most importantly, Congress listened. We didn't do this. Congress did it. They listened to us. They listened to the safety professionals. Both the House and the Senate wrote the sweeping legislative changes needed to raise the bar of airline safety for the regional airlines that have kept all of us safe. But in spite of the stellar safety record over the last 14 years, there's still a movement underfoot by some regional airlines paying their lobbyists millions to look for loopholes, look for exceptions, so that they don't have to comply with this safety bar. They keep looking for ways to get less experienced pilots in the cockpit. Why? They're not pushing safety, they want to add extra flights and raise their bottom line. The latest attempt is just an end run around clear congressional intent. It was the intent of the Airline Safety Act not to go under it, through it, just to do it. We're going to Washington again this week to remind our elected officials that this is not the time for indifference. It's not the time for leadership, for complacency, that safety will always prevail even if you tweak things down. That's not going to happen. The current safety standards work. They protect us all.
Thanks. I'm Karen's sister, Susan Burke, and I just have a few comments to make. As was mentioned by the congressman so eloquently, there's a plan afoot by SkyWest Airlines, and that's a way to utilize pilots with less experience than those who currently fly in the regional and commercial airlines. The pilot qualification rule, which a lot of people refer to as the 1,500-hour rule, was the cornerstone of the Airline Safety Act of 2010. Having two qualified pilots, fully qualified pilots, in the cockpit of a regional and a mainline carrier is absolutely critical. Second officers of regional carriers should not be learning on the job. There is a reason why no commercial airliners have crashed since Flight 3407 in 2009, and we cannot allow any weakening of these safety standards to happen. That's why we keep doing what we're doing, to remind our representatives of what happens when the standards are relaxed or corners are cut. Each of us here behind me, these family members, and I'm going to try to remember some numbers right now. 5 of these lost their spouse. 2 lost their fathers. 1 lost a grandfather, little baby over there. Another lost an uncle who was very important in his life, and we lost our sister. Lastly, A daughter, I'm so sorry. Tug lost a daughter. It's very important. And lastly, Karen Walensky lost not just her husband, but her house. She's the one whose home the plane crashed on. Did I remember everybody? Okay, good, okay. Each of us lost a precious loved one. And in their memory, we're going to keep on fighting to make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else. That's what motivates us. Thanks. John?
Thanks, guys. First, as always, I want to thank Congressman Higgins, Congressman Langworthy. Thanks so much for your efforts, your time, showing up here today and continuing the fight. But I would say we got to stop meeting like this. Nick, you were with Chris Lee right from the beginning. Brian, you were obviously there from the beginning. 14 years. 14 years we've been trudging back to D.C. to keep in place what was told to us by congressmen and their staff was a no-brainer. This legislation was. The airlines continue to call out the 1,500-hour rule. They want to change and modify the 1,500-hour rule. As Karen said, or Sue said, it's not the 1,500-hour rule. It is the Airline Safety Act of 2010. And I'd ask each of you in your lead stories, in your papers, call it the Airline Safety Act of 2010. It's not the 1,500-hour rule. When the crash happened, we, the family members, we want to know why. Why is my daughter dead? Why did I lose my husband, my sister? Why? So we began to look at the underlying causes of this crash, and I'm going to walk you back just a few years so we can re-examine some of the reasons we did that. First thing we saw as we looked at the crashes was a decade before, they were all regional airlines. Truth is, I didn't know what a regional airline was. I didn't know there was a difference. When we came to the first meeting, the family members called together, somebody from Colgan Air walked up to the podium. We didn't know who they were. We bought tickets from Continental Airlines. Turns out the regional airlines are a whole different system than the majors operate. And as referenced before, the standards are way different. So all the crashes were on regionals for the decade before, none on the majors. Why did that happen? We began to look at the deficiencies in the training. Once we saw that it was a particular group of airlines, we began to see deficiencies in the training from the majors to the regionals. The first thing we saw was you could fly in that second officer's seat, first officer, with as little as 250 hours of flight time. You can't get in a major seat without 7,000 or 8,000 hours of flight time. 250 hours. The FAA rule for some 40 or 50 years had been a minimum standard of 1,500 hours to fly a plane. All that we did was say both seats should be equally qualified. That's the minimum standard, 1,500 hours. So they go after that rule. It's too much, they say. It's too many hours, they say. Well, here's a flash. Since it's been instituted, as has been said several times, there hasn't been a single commercial airline crash in the United States. The rule is working. Excuse me. We went to a hearing, one of the first ones in D.C., and I think it was the CEO of Colgan Airlines stood up there and said, had we known this pilot's record, we wouldn't have hired him. So part of the deficiency was the airlines couldn't look at the background of the pilots they were hiring. They didn't have to disclose that this particular pilot failed 4 or 5 check rides. Simple, if you will, learner's permit test to fly a plane. The airline didn't know it. The CEO said we would not have hired him had we known that. So we had a minimum standard. Let's make both seats at least 1,500 hours. FAA number, not ours. Let's get this background check. You know, if you're in New York State and want to drive a school bus, they'll check your driver's license until you're 16 years old to see how you did. The airlines couldn't check what a guy did 5 years before. They said they wouldn't have hired him. NASA scientists showed up at that same hearing and said that these pilots don't get enough rest. And they defined how many hours, I won't belabor it. But the pilots were getting 5 or 6 hours sleep a night. That's all they were getting, and sometimes less. The NASA scientists said, that's like drunk driving. You do that 3 or 4 days in a row. Your reflex time, your ability to respond is like driving inebriated. So we looked at that. There was a deficiency. The families looked and said, we need to change these deficiencies. And praise God, the Congress said, amen. We need to change the deficiencies. So we did that. The one that really galled me more than anything was I was told they gave a CD to some of the pilots to take home and watch for stall recovery training. I couldn't give CD to my concrete finisher and say, go watch that and learn how to finish concrete. That's what they're giving the pilots. But the airlines want to step in now and say, we have a better way to train these people. Get rid of this stuff. We can train them better in-house. History says they can't. History says they can't. So I want to say this. In 9/11, we've been accused of having emotional responses. Am I emotional? Believe it. Of course I'm emotional. I lost my daughter. So these folks have been accused. You're just an emotional response. That's what it was. Y'all remember 9/11? We all had an emotional response. And these two ladies here lost their brother-in-law in the crash 9/11. You know what his wife did, their sister? She started working in D.C. So we need to change things. Oh, she was emotional, guaranteed. Bev was emotional, but she said, we need to change things. So they worked to change things. Today we have hardened cockpits for pilots. Today you can't get on a plane with a wine opener or a small knife. And you know what? We haven't had a hijacking since. The emotional, I'll call it passionate response, worked. Same with us. Were we emotional? Yes, we were emotional. But we looked and said, with our passion, with our loss, said, what can we do to fix things? And we fixed them. And we haven't had an airline crash since. Please, if you're going to have a lead story, make it about the Airline Safety Act of 2010, not about the 1,500-hour rule. This is about saving lives and changing the history of aviation. Thanks so much.
Questions?
Do you worry about SkyWest? If I read it correctly, this idea of trying to do, you want to step over, Congressman?
Sure.
Yeah. Because this looks like they're trying to pull a legal loophole here. 30 seats and less, if I understand it correctly. And they're going to claim that they're not operating under an airline connection. Do you fear that this is just another way to chip away here? And could that be illegal?
Well, that's exactly what it is. It's a vile attempt to circumvent the Aviation Safety Act, as John has referenced. And our job is to ensure that that doesn't happen. So the authorization for the Federal Aviation Administration will expire at the end of this fiscal year, September 30th. What we're doing now is to ensure that nothing changes to undermine aviation safety. So, do you fear it? No, but it's very, very predictable. There's an industry out there that doesn't want to comply with what was approved by Congress, and they're looking for ways to circumvent it. Our job, Congressman Langworthy and I, is to ensure that that doesn't happen, and that's what we're committed to, as are the families. I can't believe they're going to Washington again. I don't know how many trips they've taken, but they are a constant presence in Washington, and their presence, these families of the victims, is very, very important in the committee hearing when there is a debate about reauthorizing the FAA.
I'll just add to comments. I reiterate everything that Congressman Higgins says, but SkyWest's customers need to know about this, because would you knowingly get on a plane where they were trying to hire pilots that were inexperienced? I mean, it is just not fair to the customer. The flying public deserves safety, and that's what we're here to fight for. And we're not going to stop fighting until we get the job done, get this reauthorization finished without any changes in language that would weaken these requirements.
Conversely, do you feel that the FAA rejecting Republic Airlines' attempts to do something last year, cutting back the hours, does that give you a little more feeling that you can be successful in trying to thwart anything?
Well, I think it's certainly a positive sign. I mean, any airline that is trying to use a loophole like this to change their classification to get in pilots that are underexperienced, I mean, I think they need to be held to account. And that's exactly what we're doing, bringing awareness to this. And in this week, with the hearings that are going on for the FAA reauthorization, I think we'll continue to do just that. People take things for granted. This has been the law for a long time. And they get complacent. And you know what? When there's stress on business, and there's stress on every business in America right now, there's labor stress on every business. This is not the place to cut corners. Our lives are at risk every single time we get on an airplane. And the fact that you have someone trying to look at a spreadsheet and say, wow, we can save a few bucks if we cut 500 hours off of this, or we allowed someone to sit in a flight simulator and count that as real time. You know, video games aren't the same as the reality of flying an airplane and getting that proper classic training because you're taking the flying public's lives in your hands. And these families are here assembled again, and they can tell the story better than anyone. And I dare any other legislator to sit across the table from these folks and listen to their story and not be on their side at the end.
Does anybody from the families too, I mean, you have a new congressman, if I understand it correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Sam Graves of Missouri, who's now chairman of that committee, of transportation and infrastructure. Any feelings about the ways he might be leaning, or does anybody, I don't know if anybody wants to add anything, have you had any chance to reach out?
I don't think we've talked to him personally, but our understanding is sure.
John, thanks.
I don't know that we talked to him personally, but our understanding is he is, I'll say, looking favorably at altering some of the rules. And I just want to touch on that simulator that Nick mentioned. You all from Western New York, you want your 16-year-old taking a simulator to a NASCAR driver and go out and drive on our ice and snow? We know it's not the same, and it's the same with airline pilots. You can't repeat. You can't simulate. You can simulate, but you can't repeat. You get the experience. You wouldn't let your 16-year-old on a learner's permit go and drive the ice and snow after being on a NASCAR. We can't let our pilots go and fly us around after they've been on a simulator. But back to Graves, we're not sure what he's going to do. Our understanding is he's favorably reviewing, unfavorably to us, but favorably reviewing some changes. Is that what you understand as well?
Do you think, I don't know what the makeup of the rest of the committee is, and I guess this is your first step.
I can tell you it's one more Republican than Democrat. That helps you in the House, right? Just because that's the way our legislature is today.
Congressman Langworthy, do you think you can?
I certainly, I would oppose any FAA reauthorization that changed any sort of any changes to the 1,500-hour flight requirements. And I will be very vocal, especially with our New York State delegation. We have several members on the T&I committee. We'll be having further conversations. I've already had some initial conversations there. I mean, the committee chair, I have not had the discussion with directly. I don't know his opinions. I know the industry is looking for relief from this rule, and that's really what's going to drive this discussion. So I think this is not a partisan issue. This is a bipartisan issue. We need to have the flying public speak up. We need to have every member of Congress educated as to how we got to this number and what's on the line here. This is not the place to cut corners. And also the U.S. Senate has to consider the same legislation.
Yeah, I think one thing that was forgotten, that when the crash of Flight 3407 happened, I think it was more than 50% of the flights out of the Buffalo airport were flown on regional airlines by the mainline carriers. We didn't know it, as we said, when my sister bought a ticket on Continental, and when Colgan showed up, we didn't even know anything about it. So what the critical issue right now is, if they make an exception for SkyWest or for any airline, that is a really slippery slope, because it's not just about, who cares, it might be a small venue. It is going to spread, and it's going to come to the Buffalo airport, the Rochester airport, the state of West Virginia. At the time, I remember 100% of the flights out of the state of West Virginia were on regional carriers. That's what we are here to, and with our Western New York delegation, to say we can't go back. People have forgotten. We can't be complacent. What I wanted to show you is this visual. This is not ours. This is the Airline Pilots Association. Let's see if I can hold it up. This is the spreadsheet you want to look at. The bars, these are the crashes, the fatal crashes in the U.S. in the 20 years preceding Flight 3407 in 2009. 0. There was one fatality that we talk about when we say 99%. It was a Southwest passenger. It was a mechanical failure where it wasn't a crash, where she was unfortunately killed when her window was broken. But these are fatal crashes, 0, since the Airline Safety Act went into effect. That's the bottom line that we work.
I guess I just have one last question. The FAA reauthorization, is it every 5 years?
Every 5 years.
Does that, unfortunately, I don't know, allow efforts to try to chip away constantly? And I don't know, maybe they should reauthorize it every 5 years. I don't know what.
Well, every one of these agencies has, we're dealing with the Farm Bill. That's on a 5-year run. And the FAA reauthorization has come up. This is a convenient place for the airline industry to try to fight to make changes. We have to be vigilant. That's why we're bringing public awareness. We're getting to work. We're working our colleagues, but also these families are getting back to work because this is a time where they could make a change, where the realistic nature of the airline industry getting a standalone bill to change this is very slim. But language into a big reauthorization, that would be the time where they would try to make an attempt like that. And I'm not, naming names or making accusations to specific airlines or parts of the industry, but we're seeing activity. And we just need the entire public to be aware of this in joining the efforts.
Yeah, just, again, going back to the start of this, the National Transportation Safety Board was established for a purpose, to investigate these kinds of accidents, these crashes. They're on the ground, forensics, technicians, to find probable, likely, certain cause. And every provision in the Aviation Flight Safety Act was a direct result of evidence that they found. This was an avoidable crash, but for the fact that pilots were ill-trained in terms of the duration of their pilot training requirement, in terms of the pilot database, to show, as John said, if there is a history that says that this pilot should not be in the cockpit, every passenger in America should know that. And that individual should not be hired to and entrusted with the lives of so many people. So the industry has been fighting this from day one. And of course they're going to continue to fight it because for them, there's a financial bottom line. For us, for all of us, the bottom line is flight safety and ensuring that the flying public is safe to the fullest extent possible. That is the government's responsibility here. So there will be efforts this year, the next reauthorization, the one after that, but it's incumbent upon us to be vigilant, to ensure that they do not succeed in this vile circumvention of safety rules that are intended to do one thing: save lives.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you. That's a great job.
What is the hearing actually to? This week?
Yeah, there's a transfer. The FAA reauthorization is before the Transportation Committee. So, Graves is the chair. Larson is the ranking member. Graves is a Republican. Larson is a Democrat. I've talked to Rick about this. He's very familiar with this issue. Talked to him several times. But like all legislation, there's always going to be external pressure that is, brought to bear by highly paid lobbyists. So that's going to occur this week. It starts, and they're going to take testimony. Nick and I are going to be there providing testimony. The families Tuesday? Wednesday.
We're there Wednesday.
Okay.
So you're going to be down there Wednesday.
Yeah. So this is a process. This is a good process, to be truthful. But we will prevail because all of the facts are on our side.